All right, welcome everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and you are looking live in New York City, one of many of these Christmas markets set up around town, and they are under heightened security alert on a day the guy behind those Berlin attacks was gunned down. But the feeling that and the fear that it could happen here is rampant. Again, these Christmas markets all over the city, and of course in cities across the country where they've beefed up security to make sure people can shop and nothing else. We're all over it now with Charlie Gasparino at a Christmas market in New York's famed Columbus Circle. We've got Amy Kellogg with us as well in Milan, Italy, with the latest on the killing of the guy behind the Berlin attacks. We begin with Charlie. Charlie.
Here's what we know, Neil. The NYPD and the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, they will be working throughout the holiday weekend to make sure New York City is safe. They will be focusing on, high-impact targets like right here in Columbus Circle, Times Square, you name it, in Manhattan. But they are working overtime. The city is on red alert for terrorist attacks. And I will tell you one thing, Neil, as someone who, reported on 9/11 and the aftermath and what has happened afterwards, there is no better law enforcement unit than the NYPD FBI task force. They thwarted a lot of terrorist attacks in the past. They're going to be on high alert now. You could see a lot of cops around Columbus Circle, and they're all over Times Square. And listen, New Yorkers are known to to watch out what's going around you. If you see something, report it. But if you're going to feel safe anywhere, I feel safe in New York City knowing that these guys are behind us. But they are on red alert. They worry about a terrorist attack happening here in New York during this season, during the holiday season. But like I said, they're out in force. Back to you, Neil.
Charlie, one of the things I noticed, a lot of these guys are brandishing machine guns. They're making it very clear who they are, what they're doing, and what they're trying to stop, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen. If the task force is a paramilitary force. Let's not. These are not rent-a-cops here. This is a paramilitary force, highly trained like special forces, trained like a special forces unit, and they know how to get the job done. Now, on top of that is the surveillance, and I think that's the key thing. The FBI and the NYPD Joint Task Force has superb surveillance, so they know essentially what's going on. They know the threat levels. Listen, no one could give you 100% certainty about anything. But like I said, these guys are out in force, both physically with the machine guns, but behind the scenes, using cyber warfare basically to combat the cyber warfare of the terrorists. So yes, this is red alert, and like I said, these guys know what they're doing.
All right, thank you very, very much, my friend. Charlie Gasparino in the middle of all of that. No doubt they're probably afraid of Charlie, too. I wouldn't mess with him. We got Amy Kellogg now in Milan with the latest on the investigation behind the guy who was responsible for taking out 12 and injuring dozens more in a truck attack on that city. It all ended today. Amy, what's the latest?
Well, Neil, Anis Amri was walking around by himself at 3 o'clock in the morning at a deserted train station on the outskirts of Milan. Police didn't stop him, Neil, because they recognized his picture, nor because of any intelligence. They just simply thought that he looked very suspicious. So they started to question him. He said he was from Calabria in the south of Italy. When they didn't buy his accent, they asked to see some proof. He didn't have any papers, Neil. He didn't have a telephone, but he had a .22 caliber shotgun. The chief of police of Milan said he was simply like a ghost. And of course, we know he pulled out that shotgun, shot one of the two officers who'd stopped him. The other killed Amri on the spot. DNA and a careful and very scientific face match from the pictures available led to the positive ID. Amri had used at least 6 aliases since fleeing arrest for theft in Tunisia in 2012. He slipped onto a boat with Syrian refugees, arrived in Italy originally, torched a refugee center here, did 4 years in jail, apparently radicalized there. Italy tried to deport him, but Tunisia wouldn't recognize him as theirs. Then he slipped to Germany. He had brushes with the law there, then was under surveillance for suspected plans to stage an attack. Germany tried to deport him also, but again had problems with paperwork. He returned here last night to Italy, possibly via France, and finally the journey ends, but the investigation is not over.
Our attention continues to be at its highest level. Threats must not be underestimated. But I believe what happened tonight allows our fellow citizens to know that the government is present, that Italy is present.
So, Neil, despite chaos here in Italy and a government that recently collapsed, this country is feeling like it has its act together tonight. Finally, there was one report that Omri tried to slip into Germany disguised as a Syrian refugee with the help of ISIS, because obviously Angela Merkel, the chancellor, has been sympathetic specifically to Syrians. Tonight, the investigation continues. Police here want to know who else he knew, why he was in Italy, what his network really is, Neil.
All right, Amy Kellogg, thank you very, very much. What's interesting in these stories that Amy and others have been reporting is that given the open borders that have come ever since we had the European community, where all these individual countries would exactly act as one, even to a single currency that's been under pressure. The good thing about it for tourists and those living there is that you could freely go from one country to another. The flip side of that is that bad guys can go from one country to another. This is the route that Anis Amri took just over the course of the last few days ahead of getting gunned down today in Italy to Trump foreign policy advisor Walid Faris. That is the flip side, I guess, of these open borders. Convenient for tourists, convenient for those who live in the area, convenient as well, though, for the bad guys. What do you make of that?
Well, that's true, and that's true also for criminals, for drug dealers, for fleeing warlords, what have you. In the case of Amri, did you notice in the report that the issue was complication in paperwork? I mean, he has met with law enforcement in several places. He torched a center, so he should be on the radar. And the fact that he was still on the continent, or at least in this case in Germany or in Italy, is because there was a complication in paperwork. The problem here is that the European authorities in general, Germany in particular, have no other structure than to catch them doing something illegal, which has nothing to do with terrorism, to be able to deport them, while in fact the continent is being submerged by elements from ISIS penetrating the refugees. That's the bigger picture, in fact.
You know what worries me too, Walid, is that the paperwork issue was an issue for his country of origin, Tunisia, apparently not willing to accept it because the paperwork wasn't in order there. And I don't know if that's a case of a potential bad guy they didn't want back, or that's a sign that there are others just like him.
But that's one case. I mean, look, when we have a case of terrorism, then what happens with us, all of us, with the media and think tanks, we focus on his private life as if the next terrorist is going to be exactly like him, a clone. What we're seeing is that every terrorist, every jihadi has a different context. What we are failing in seeing is the big picture, the movement. Who's actually radicalized them and placing them and asking them to do these strikes? That's the big picture we need to answer.
But, you know, when we talk about in this country, Walid, where the Obama administration talks about aggressively vetting those who are trying to get in here, and that the average time takes in excess of 12 months. But in this case, where you have refugees, those who made it across the Mediterranean to get into places like Italy and like Germany and all these others, and they presumably did have something to show where they were from. And then in this guy's case, the country of origin is in some dispute, including the country they tried to return him to. How can you vet something that can't be vetted, or where there is no paperwork, or where people from the origin country are denying the paperwork?
Absolutely, which leads us to the much greater discussion, which I hope 2017 would open, which is this issue of vetting. It has two ends. One end is in the country of origin, and in these cases we see that most of them are coming from Syria. There's a civil war in Syria, and we're trying to find an area in Syria where we can direct the refugees to, so we won't have that problem of vetting. But even though, if there are elements who wants to come here, the vetting happens there, by our authorities or by NGOs or by allies authorities. And second, let's suppose some of them will come here, apply for political asylum. What we call vetting now is not vetting. I mean, we're asking them question, are you part of a terrorist organization? That is not vetting. We need to look at the real thinking process. I heard of the last potential of looking at social media. That's the last potential. Well, that's exactly where they interact. That's exactly where I did my research, you know, in some of my books to detect the jihadi forces.
Amazing. Walid, thank you for all your guidance and help analyzing this craziness. Walid Faris, now a Donald Trump foreign policy advisor. By the way, you have probably noticed, we take a look at Wall and Broad, that if the markets are flummoxed or concerned about this, Well, they've had a funny way of showing it, notching another gain for a week, the longest such stretch we have seen now in a couple of years in terms of back-to-back weekly gains. But what's more interesting here as we look at this is how the markets ignore even the brutal stuff, even Berlin, even what happened in Turkey, and on and on. How long can that continue? What have I told you? A lot depends on what a certain president-elect does and says after this. All right. A lot of people have called the markets and their run-up since Donald Trump's election the Trump effect. That makes sense. But can you also have individual Trump effects and individual stocks? I want to show you a chart of two very big defense contractors on the day. You'll notice the one on the left of Lockheed Martin going down, the one on the right of Boeing going up. Could that have something to do with Boeing's CEO, after meeting with Donald Trump, showing a willingness to maybe refigure the price of an expensive Air Force One contract, and the CEO of Lockheed Martin showing at least no such willingness right now on the F-35 contract, or a willingness to talk to the press after meeting with Donald Trump? We don't know what happened in that meeting. We do know that the CEO did not talk to the press afterwards, and we do know 24 hours after that meeting, Donald Trump was sort of putting that F-35 contract up for bid or something like it, tweeting out that maybe Boeing can come up with an alternative to that fighter aircraft. Whoa, Gary B. Smith, that's a big deal. What do you make of that?
I think it's huge. You know, one of the things, Neil, in the whole during the primaries and in the general election that was not brought up a lot, you know, because we always focus on Trump's personality, but we rarely focus on the fact that he was a tough businessman. And that is what he's bringing to the table right now. Look, I think from what I read in the defense industry, substituting an F-18 for the F-35, which has been in development for like 20 years, is kind of silly. That's not going to happen. That doesn't matter. Trump is showing leadership. He's showing that he's looking at the bottom line. He's showing everything that the vast majority of the public, why they voted for him. He's showing those qualities. I think it's absolutely terrific.
Is there another level, though, that we're not appreciating here, that this is a way of saying he, as a Republican, is open to cutting defense issues, especially if there's a case of, you know, padded contracts? Like, I'm not sure how the Air Force One deal went, or for that matter, you know, the F-35 deal went. But that even though a contract might be deemed complete and signed and sealed, unless this guy's writing off on it, it's not delivered. And that's a powerful message to send anyone who might have looked at Republicans as loath to touch their pet area defense, that this could be a message to Democrats. Are you open to touch your pet area, let's say entitlements, and maybe we could strike a deal?
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think he's going to look at any area, whether it was the Air Force One, which cost, you know, $1 zillion, or this F-35, which was, it's already $200 billion, Neil, over budget, 3 or 4 years behind schedule. I think he's going to look at every area like that. I think he's going to look, hopefully, at all the waste and fraud that's in Medicare, Medicaid, even Social Security. I think he's bringing his business sense to the bottom line, and I agree with you 100%. If he's willing to say, look, you know, there's nothing sacrosanct in defense. Let's look at entitlements, too. I think it makes it very hard for the Democrats to kind of fight that logic.
And I always see these things at levels. I mean, if you've read The Art of the Deal, of course, his signature book, among others, but part of that is to accept nothing at face value and to keep reworking stuff until it is of your interest and you've gotten to a deal that can be acceptable to all involved. Now, I think in this case, we've been used to government overruns. We've been used to contracts that went crazy, just like people who are getting contractors hired to finish a kitchen or to do a basement, and they grudgingly accept the fact that the contract's going to go up, something's going to go wrong, they're going to pay through the nose, and they do it. I think, and I could be very wrong, this is Donald Trump's way of saying, no, not our collective kitchen, not our collective basement. What do you think?
Exactly, Neil. Look, I think the phrase is probably, it'll be overused shortly, but the whole, there's a new sheriff in town, right, I think is very appropriate. Look, I don't remember in 8 years Obama ever questioning the defense budget, what was spent. Maybe he did privately, but the fact that Trump is not only doing it, but doing it very publicly and telling the American people that I am questioning these expenses on your behalf, I think it's remarkable. I think, again, he's showing exactly why people voted for him.
Now, we try to read into sort of video things. We're just showing a snippet there, left of a screen, that Boeing CEO talking after meeting with Donald Trump. The Lockheed Martin CEO, she chose not to talk to reporters afterwards, and people read all sorts of palace intrigue into that. But hours later, we've come to discover that Donald Trump is sort of throwing out a rival F-35 contract out there and letting Boeing maybe bid on it. So something went wrong, and I'm wondering if that is, in these private meetings with CEOs, part of the rough and tumble nature of them, that they're not necessarily warm and fuzzy affairs.
Exactly. You know, I think it's like we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. We're seeing the public announcements, the public Trump. He's getting out there. He's raising the flag. He's seeing if people salute. But behind the scenes, you better bet that not only is Boeing and Lockheed Martin, but General Dynamics and Northrop and all the other defense contractors are scrambling now. They're on their heels right now. They're thinking, wait a second, we had this really cozy, nice relationship outside the Beltway. We better get in there and sharpen up. Already, you know, Boeing came back and said, oh, don't worry about the Air Force One. We're going to come in under, you know, whatever it was, $4 million or $4 billion. I can't even remember the number now.
No,
but anyway, they said, we're going to give you a discount.
Yeah. Exactly. So. And here we go. Gary B., thank you. Merry Christmas, my friend. All right. These images to the right of me are those of the attacker in Berlin. This is the guy who got in a truck and ran on a sidewalk at a Christmas market fair in Berlin and plowed down and killed 12 people and injured dozens more, got away. But less than 24 hours later, he was meeting at a Berlin mosque, sometimes at the oddest of hours, 3 or 4 in the morning their time. Surveillance there caught him on tape and was able to try to track his goings. After that, he went to a number of other countries, Italy, chief among them, where he was killed today. But the point is, a lot of his meeting points were at mosques. Former Navy SEAL David Sears with us right now. David, we also know that authorities checked out one of those mosques, and it led to a lot of things. Some people wince at that and say, wait a minute, that's going a little too far. What do you say?
Absolutely not. You need to have both offense and defense in this war on terrorism. The defensive end is putting up barricades. We can do chicanes. You can do physical security measures, but you have to have an offensive piece, and that's getting the intelligence to find where these guys are. We know that they are operating out of mosques, and they're using these. So there's no reason we shouldn't be able to surveil and look at these mosques, both overtly and covertly.
You know what's so weird about it, too, is that there are those who will look at that and say, all right, Muslims were targeted. And I know that will be the immediate reaction here in the United States if we go on, I don't know, for want of a better term, a mosque hunt. But a lot of the more egregious attacks there have come from those that were plotted out in mosques. So what do you do?
Absolutely. We have to get over that political correctness, though. I mean, you're doing intelligence-based policing. You're doing an offensive intelligence-gathering piece. That is, if you're going after biker gangs, you go to biker bars. When we went after the drug problems in Miami, you went to the Colombian sections of the neighborhoods, right? When you went after the Italian Mafia, you went to Little Italy. You didn't go to Little Poland to look at the Italian Mafia. It makes complete common sense once you take out the political correctness.
And one of the things we realized is that once we started doing that, or the German authorities started doing that, they were able to track this guy down to the point that they found him in Italy and obviously lying about where he was from and a bad accent to indicate where he was from. But I was just wondering how many more there are like him. I mean, if you had a guy with paperwork that was questionable to the point that even the country of origin, Tunisia, and no one can seem to confirm where that he was from, doesn't recognize that he's from there. I don't know if that's the case of Tunisia, hotbed of terrorists in its own right, not wanting him back or just not wanting to deal with it.
Right, now you're talking, and we're going on to the next problem is the refugee problem and who's coming here, who's already here. That's twofold. Stop the flow and vet the flow, and two, what's internally is why you got to do this surveillance and start looking at intelligence-based policing.
Donald Trump is tweeting out on this subject, and we cannot confirm what he is alleging in this tweet, but I'll pass it along to you, that the terrorist who killed so many people in Germany, quoting from Donald Trump, said just before the crime, "By God's will, we will slaughter you pigs. I swear we will slaughter you. This is a purely religious threat which turned into reality. Such hatred. When will the U.S. and all countries fight back?" Now, we do know, and we have heard today, that the killer in question was shouting "Allah, Allah Akbar." God is great. We don't know about this, but obviously what the president-elect is saying is that we have been politically correct to our own detriment and at the cost of lives. His approach earlier on has been to aggressively screen those who come into the country. For a while during the campaign year, all Muslims in general trying to get into the country. Where do you stand on this?
I don't say it's all Muslims, but certainly I agree, because this is a twisted form of Islam that these guys follow. So it's certainly not the entire Islamic world. That said, you have to look at these countries that have terror going on in them that these fundamentalists are coming from. Look at the Syrias, the Iraqs, the Pakistans, Afghanistans, places like that where we can't reliably vet on both sides people coming into this country. And you do two things. Either there you have to do the vetting, or if you have a piece that comes this way, you have a place that's kind of a limbo. The Guantanamo Bay piece, we've done that before for refugees. Put them there till they can be positively vetted.
I'm wondering now, we never quite learn our lessons after incidents like this. And maybe the line I always hear is that isolated incident. And, you know, I'm not the sharpest tool in this shed, but I'll tell you, Dave, I've seen a lot of isolated incidents.
No, Neil, you're right. And every time we have these, we're able to go back and reconstruct these pieces, and we see so many things that look blatantly obvious that we missed. We should be learning those lessons, but we're not. You're absolutely right.
Dave, thank you so much. I hope you have a Merry Christmas. Thank you as well for all your incredible service to this country. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Merry Christmas to you, Neil.
All right. In the meantime, Ivanka Trump gets on a plane with her family, and she's harassed on a commercial airliner. She is harassed by someone not a fan of her father's. The issue here is not that a famous person or a famous child of a person would get harassed, but that the media didn't think it was a big deal. Then flip it around. What if this were, I don't know, Chelsea Clinton? Would it be a big deal then? After this. All right, I don't know what surprised me more, that Ivanka Trump and her husband were harassed by someone who was not a fan of their father and father-in-law, or the fact that they were flying commercial. But the bottom line was they were harassed, and Ivanka Trump was particularly harassed, and someone just went nuts saying, you know, her father was the equivalent of Lucifer taking office. 2 words to that effect. And it was extreme. JetBlue had to get that person off the plane, got reaccommodated on another JetBlue flight. But still, it did unsettle a lot of folks, including the Trump family, obviously concerned for the safety of Ivanka Trump, who didn't make a big deal out of it at all and kept her cool. Former Apprentice star, luxury real estate specialist, Katrina Campins on all of that. That's pretty scary stuff, Katrina. It got me thinking, and it does happen sometimes, that you know, wait a minute. If this were Chelsea Clinton, a much bigger deal would be made of it, and I think a much bigger deal should be made of it. But
absolutely,
it was dealt in the media as much ado about nothing. What do you think?
And you're absolutely right, Neil. Picture this. Imagine for 1 minute that Chelsea Clinton is on a commercial flight with her husband and her children, and a Trump supporter berates and harasses her. Not only would it be on the cover of every newspaper, but CNN would be having a field day. I think the Democrats have to accept the fact that President-elect Trump won this election fair and square. They're coming up with so many different reasons as to why he shouldn't be president, instead of accepting the fact that the American people have spoken. You know, this couple in particular was holding a baby in their hand, and Ivanka is such a class act, and I've been working with her for years now, and I'll tell you that I wouldn't expect anything less from her, to basically try to distract her children so that they couldn't tell that this man was actually harassing her. She's a class act through and through, but that doesn't make it okay. And again, if this was the other way around, I think we'd be hearing a very different story.
All right, now obviously you are who people think you are, and obviously she's the daughter of a man who's about to become the president of the United States. She's going to move to Washington with her husband. They will serve some advisory capacity. I don't know which or what yet. So one could step back at that and say, well, that comes with the turf. You're not just a child of a president of the United States. You're more than that. You're bigger than that. It'd be equivalent of picking on Bobby Kennedy on a flight out to Washington, and his brother is the president of the United States, and he's his attorney general. You say what?
Well, she has very thick skin, and as we can tell, she was able to handle it very graciously, but that doesn't make it okay. You know, these are two gay men with a baby who have experienced how difficult it is to actually gain civil rights. And so their fear is that Donald Trump is actually going to take away their civil rights. But he has never said once that he's going to take away their civil rights, and he has much bigger fish to fry right now. He's really worried about jobs. He's worried about the economy and really protecting our borders. And he's said in public that he's not looking to reverse anything that's already been approved, and gay families will actually be able to marry. So it seems like that's one of the main reasons why they're upset, and they took it out on Ivanka. And again, it doesn't make it right, and you shouldn't harass. You have the right to feel a certain way, but I feel like the Democrats have really taken it the other way. And, you know, if this had been the reverse again, with Trump supporters harassing Hillary Clinton supporters, we would never hear the end of it. I think it's about time that people accept the fact that President-elect Trump has won the election. And I really tell people who share their concerns with me that when all is said and done, this family will go down in history as being for the people. And time will tell, but they will see it. Mark my words. Everybody will be very pleased with President-elect Trump.
The bottom line, everyone calm down when you're on a plane anyway. I mean, JetBlue or not. It'd be one thing if they run out of the blue chips, but calm down. All right, Katrina, always good seeing you. Merry Christmas. Thanks again.
Thank you, Neil. Likewise.
All right. All right, get ready for some nasty weather. We got AccuWeather's Brittany Boyer with the latest. Hey, Brittany.
Hey, Neil. Well, yeah, we're looking at some nasty weather as we get into the holidays. Are you dreaming of a white Christmas? Well, in the Northeast, we have some leftover snow. A true white Christmas is going to be across the Dakotas, even down into Salt Lake City. They're looking at about 6 to 10 inches of snow. So there's a storm system right now in the southwest. That low is going to strengthen and move into the north and east. So we have that lifting ingredient. We're also going to have to tap into this Gulf moisture down into the south. So some warm air. You get those two ingredients together, and this is where we have the threat for some severe weather. We're looking at damaging winds, also some large hail possible, heavy rain, and a few isolated tornadoes not out of the question. Unfortunately, this is how it looks for Christmas Day. So keep that in mind if you're in the Central Plains, Omaha, down to Wichita, also down into Little Rock. We are looking at the severe weather threat mainly north of I-70. That's where we will have the greatest threat for severe weather. Now let's talk about this storm and the cold air. We have blizzard warnings posted for Bismarck and also Rapid City. Check out these snowfall totals. If you're wishing for a white Christmas, this is where you have to go. Blowing and drifting snow. Bismarck's looking at about 12 to 18 inches of snow Christmas Day. So, Neil, us here on the East Coast, I'd say we're pretty lucky right now.
So no white Christmas, you're saying, for us?
Not this year.
Okay, fine. All right, that's okay. Brittany, appreciate it. Merry Christmas. Brittany Boyer.
Merry Christmas.
All right, in the meantime, forget about what Donald Trump said about nukes. Should he be tweeting about nukes after this? All right, it's the tweet heard around the world. Donald Trump saying the following: the United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes. We've got former USS Commander Kirk Lippo, former U.S. Green Beret Ben Collins, former Obama campaign advisor Dave Morey. All right, Commander Lippo, let me go with you first. His understanding was that he was responding, that is, Donald Trump, to Vladimir Putin talking about building up, modernizing their nuclear arsenal. I'm paraphrasing here. So he was responding. Now, critics have said he shouldn't have said that, or worse, tweet about it, you say what?
I think it was absolutely appropriate to respond. When you look at the fact that you're having a transition of power, you've got an outgoing president that is trying to do a lot of things, saying one thing that he's going to be cooperative in the transition but not the other, then I think it was appropriate for him to speak out, especially on a subject like nuclear weapons, where we as the United States are falling behind when it comes to the capability, flexibility, and survivability of our weapons. While a modernization program is in the works, Donald Trump needs to make it clear that we're going to follow through and make that happen for our nation's security.
David, from what I understand, a modernization program is indeed in the works, and we are addressing this, not so much about having more nukes, but about bringing everything up to the times and the period we have to avoid accidents. So how is that different from what Donald Trump was advocating?
Well, I think if he's advocating, Neil, some disruption in a dysfunctional U.S.-Russia relationship, that's a good thing. The question, though, is, is this now part of strategy? That's the real key thing. What's the next step here? If he's taking a symbolic position, as his spokesperson said this morning, that he's going to take action, control the dialogue, I agree with that. If he's announcing an arms escalation, an arms race, I'm not sure I do agree with that. That's going to take a lot more strategic thinking. China and Russia would respond. More than building up arms, we've got to modernize our nuclear arsenal. And you're right, Neil, there's plans to do that. We've got to line Russia on Syria, on ISIS, on Iran, on Eastern Europe, and we've got to make sure that terrorists don't steal loose nukes. That's part of a strategy. Over these next 4 weeks, strategy in some ways is going to be more important than tactics, I think, for the president-elect.
I guess, Ben, where I come on this, and it's not a left or right thing, Republican or Democrat, something like this I just wouldn't be tweeting about. That's all I'm saying. What are you saying?
Well, look, I think everybody's kind of losing their mind over this, I think, just a little bit. And the people that are policy wonks that are trying to pick apart every single word of this tweet to say, what's this strategy that we're highlighting? What's this indicating? Look, the reality is China and Russia have already responded.
What's your sense of his strategy? What does he advocate? He's not advocating a new arms race, right? Or what?
Well, no, look, so an arms race, look, when we talk about modernizing, we're not talking about creating more warheads, right? We're talking about the delivery system. So from silos on land, submarines, and bombers. And look, China and Russia have already responded. I mean, we're 20 years behind their technology. Okay, so, I mean, the last B-52 bomber that we used to actually deter, that rolled off the production line in 1952. All right, they're still using floppy disks in those silos that were created in the 70s. So to me, what he was signaling was, look, we've talked about it. Congress has been blocking a lot of the funding for the modernization. He wasn't saying we're going to create more warheads. He was saying, I believe we really are going to modernize. We're not just going to talk about, we're going to modernize so we can keep up with countries like China and Russia.
Well, I hope you're right. No, I do hope you're right about that. But Kirk, this is the same guy who said during the campaign that what's the good about having these things if we don't use them? And I know he dialed that back a little bit to explain his position, but he is a little fast and loose with this. I raised this with my colleague and friend Stuart Varney that wouldn't it be a killer that we get to Dow 20,000 and then we blow up. But I kid to make the point, he's got to be careful, right?
He absolutely needs to be careful in how he tweets and what he tweets. But you also have to remember, the establishment on both sides of the aisle for 20 plus, 30 plus years now, they've gotten us to a position now where we are behind. We are behind the Russians. We are behind the Chinese. And a little bit of an unorthodox approach.
We've got over 5,000 nuclear warheads. I guess they have a few hundred more than us, enough to blow the world up a gazillion times over. Right?
That's a falsehood.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's not the warheads we're talking about, it's the delivery system. So it's cruise missiles that have, better targeting technology. It's aircraft that have better stealth technology. So we're not talking about the number of warheads.
All right, let me switch gears, and if you don't mind, and Dave, I'll go to you on this. Renegotiating deals that are supposedly done. The head of Lockheed Martin, I guess, had a tension convention meeting with the president-elect, and the next day we find out that Donald Trump is open to opening up a contract for the F-35 fighter with a competitive bid by Boeing. What do you think of all of that?
Well, I think some disruption is in order here. I don't agree with some of the guests here that we're so far behind in this arms race. But in terms of the other example with Lockheed and such, the way the procurement process works, we need to disrupt that. That hasn't been disrupted in several decades. I think this is classic Trump, disrupting to get a better deal, and that's a good thing. All
right, guys, I want to thank you all. I wish you all a Merry Christmas and great service to your country in each and individual capacity. Kirk Lippo, Ben Collins, Dave Morey. All right, again,
Merry
Donald
Christmas,
Trump tweets, and that is his form of communication, and there are signs that that might be increasingly the case when he becomes president of the United States. Sean Spicer is going to be his press secretary, as all but indicated. Things are going to change. That is perhaps an understatement. So these types of debates will ensue, and so will the battle and the quest for 20,000. It will be enriching or it will not be. Merry Christmas.